Alright, second part of this video, we had to kind of backtrack to this one slide, but again, let me bring these up. Wisdom and beliefs, ethics and conduct, and practices and meditation. So basically, accepting the reddish orange is kind of accepting the truths of Buddhism. Then those truths, once you've accepted them, lead you to certain ethics and conduct. And for a lot, it's important to realize that for a lot of lay Buddhists, around the world, non-scholars, non-super devoted people, as far as their religious practices and doctrine is concerned, the blue is about as far as they get, right? They have ethical and conductive ways of going about their life that are reflective rather of the Buddhist teaching, but they never really get over into the purple. Maybe they'll dabble in it a little bit, but it's kind of like the difference between, you know, some Christians, most Christians actually in the United States that allow their life to be guided, on some level by certain beliefs that they have about the Bible and about Jesus, etc. But they won't ever necessarily go on a missions trip. They won't ever necessarily do a long fast. They won't necessarily make prayer a spiritual discipline. They might not even know what a spiritual discipline is, etc. So it's kind of like that, or that kind of analogy could be made. But it's important to realize, and I didn't get to say this on the first part of this video where we had this slide for the first time. It's important to realize what the goal of all of this is from a Buddhist perspective. If you have the right view, right intentions, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, right mindfulness, all of those things are a gradual stepping away from the world of attachment, the world of possessions, the world of relationships. Remember, this is not purely anti-materialism. It's also kind of anti-family, pretty much anti-everything that makes you you. Let me explain what I mean by that. Buddhism is anti-personal identity. The core truth underlying everything in the Buddhist system, at least at the start, and a lot of this has changed in later arising forms of Buddhism, but the original intuition seems to be that if you think of yourself as an individual, that means that you are still holding on to a lot of attachments. Because here's what your attachments tend to do. In fact, it's what they always do. Not only do they serve to fulfill you in some way, but the way in which they fulfill you makes you distinct from other people. That's my house. It's not everybody's house, it's my house. That's my mom, that's my wife, that's my stuff. It's my Lamborghini, it's my dog, whatever. All that my, all those attachments serve to define you as an individual person. So it makes sense that as you move away from all those attachments, starting at the top here and going all the way around through the Eightfold Path, this is the way to stop craving, this is the way to stop attachment. As you relinquish all of those attachments, you also are relinquishing your understanding of who you are as an individual. This is why the ultimate goal of Buddhism, which is achieved upon death, if you've gone all the way through all of these steps, it's achieved upon death, is called nirvana. Nirvana, very interesting word. It literally means, in its original language, it literally means blown out. Blown out, like a candle, snuffed out, gone. It's basically, the goal, this is crazy to us as Westerners on a lot of levels, but the goal of Buddhism is basically the cessation of personal existence. Very, very interesting, right? And of course, that kind of thing doesn't catch on too much when you want to become a missionary-minded religion, as it will eventually. So some changes will be made. But that appears to be the initial teachings of the Buddha. So what does Buddhism look like in the beginning? Here you have a picture of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, presiding over the Sangha, the Buddhist community. The Sangha is almost kind of the equivalent of the Islamic Ummah or the Christian church. The Sangha constitutes one of the three jewels of Buddhism, which are kind of three core principles. So from this lecture, you're going to need to know the Four Noble Truths. Well, actually, you're going to need to know the Four Passing Sights, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the three jewels. So lots of kind of numbered things to keep in mind with Buddhism. The Dharma. Now immediately you're going to think of Vedic Hinduism, and you're going to think, oh, I thought they were done with all that dharmic stuff. Well, remember that dharma, like a lot of words in English, can mean different things in different contexts. For Buddhists, Dharma means teaching. Generally speaking, that's what it refers to. It refers to teaching, the Buddha's teaching, essentially. Essentially, the Dharma is the Eightfold Path. Sometimes maybe you've seen kind of the eight-spoked wheel. The eight-spoked wheel, it kind of serves as a symbol for Buddhism. That eight-spoked wheel is sometimes referred to as the wheel of Dharma, and it's the wheel of teaching, the wheel that was set in motion by the Buddha, is what they'll say, right? And so, of course, the Buddha is also one of the three jewels. He's the one who brought the Dharma, and it's from the Buddha and from his Dharma that a community was gathered, and they all support each other and help each other, and that's the Sangha. That's the original community. Now, you'll notice as you look around this picture, actually, a lot of these guys have hair. Pretty much none of them would have had any hair on their head, actually, originally. A lot of them would have been bald. But this is an image of the original Sangha. Notice you've got all men here. That's correct. Notice they all look a lot like monks, because they are. And that's correct. The original Buddhist movement was very ascetic, kind of male only, and it was basically for people like Siddhartha, people who had kind of taken steps to detach themselves from their lives, to move toward nirvana by relinquishing their personal identity, their personal way of being in the world, by relinquishing their stuff and their station in life and their caste, etc. So it was basically a denial movement at the start. That kind of movement can persevere, and it appeared to persevere rather well, actually, because the Buddha was so committed and his teaching was so compelling, and he had many committed, compelling teachers under him in the original Sangha, and they all went out and they were trying to spread the teachings. But here's the thing, when teachings are spread, when they go outward from their original source, they always get diluted. It's inevitable. It's just like playing a game of telephone. Eventually the message gets distorted or changed or watered down. And this very kind of, again, initially pretty hierarchical, pretty top-heavy form of Buddhism with a lot of focus on pretty elite monks will eventually be reacted against by quite a few people. And it's that kind of reaction, which we actually don't know too much about. We don't have like a very strong historical chronicle of the specific events. But it's that sort of thing, that kind of focus on the monks and kind of the elitism of asceticism that will lead to the split, kind of the development of two main branches, two different branches of Buddhism. So here we have the original Sangha. Over time, this group of monks and everybody else will grow, and the Sangha will start to incorporate more lay people, but the lay people in the original Sangha basically seem to have the role of simply fulfilling the needs of the monks. It doesn't seem there's much of a real religious place for the laity. If you're not a monk, you don't really count that much in the original Sangha. So out of that, there's going to eventually be a pretty predictable lay reaction meant to include the laity more, and that reaction is going to become what we now know today as Mahayana Buddhism. It's pronounced Mahayana and sometimes it's pronounced Mahayana. Both just different ways of saying it. Mahayana Buddhism is kind of the newer form, the innovative form. The name Mahayana means great, Maha, great, Yana, vehicle. The great vehicle means it's a big vehicle, it's a big truck, it's a big raft. It can hold a ton of people. It's more focused on the people. And Mahayana Buddhism is going to introduce all kinds of novel teachings that are going to greatly go beyond the original, pretty simplistic, pretty austere teachings of the Buddha. And when it comes to the austere, original, monkish teachings of the Buddha, those are preserved for us in what's called Theravada Buddhism. Right, so let's talk about Mahayana Buddhism first. First of all, this is by far the largest group of Buddhists in the world, very aggressively missionary, with just a lot of innovative beliefs and distinctive kind of practices, and there's many schools of Mahayana Buddhism. And it's the proliferation and diversification of Mahayana Buddhism that makes Buddhism remarkably hard to pin down. So don't think that because I've given you what amounts to a pretty straightforward two-part lecture here, don't be thinking that suddenly you've got a grasp on what all Buddhists think. There is such diversity that I'm not even very confident, except for maybe talking about 4 or 5 of the literally dozens and dozens of sects. And that's just the way that it is. But here are some important innovations, right? Mahayana, I already told you, means great vehicle. Mahayana Buddhism pretty quickly develops a belief in what are called bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas are enlightened beings. Bodhisattva carries a lot of the weight of the term Buddha. And basically, what is a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva is somebody who, according to Mahayana Buddhists, they achieve enlightenment, but they opt not to go on to nirvana when they die. Instead, they choose to stay behind. Sometimes it's like a spirit, or sometimes it's like a deity. Mahayana Buddhism does have some polytheistic sects to it. They might stay behind as a deity, or they might become reincarnated as another great teacher. And the whole point of this is to help other people achieve nirvana. So they use their status of great wisdom, but rather than going on and kind of leaving everybody to their own devices, like Siddhartha did when he passed away, bodhisattvas relinquish for a time their claim on nirvana in order to help other people. So again, you can see immediately there's a very devotional aspect to it, a very lay-focused aspect to it. There's a very compassionate aspect to it. Mahayana Buddhism also believes in kind of a methodology that sometimes is referred to as skillful means. And skillful means basically means that when a Mahayana Buddhist missionary moves into a countryside or a place or a nation where another religion is being practiced, they are allowed and encouraged under Mahayana Buddhist understandings to look at that religion and kind of build bridges between those beliefs and Mahayana Buddhism. Like, they'll point to a deity, right, in some other religion and say, oh, well, that's a bodhisattva. In fact, Mahayana Buddhists are very comfortable saying that Jesus is a bodhisattva, for instance. And this is just skillful means. It's kind of their method of religious blending, trying to draw more and more people onto the great vehicle. Mahayana Buddhism is pretty relativistic so far as major world religions go. There are also a few Mahayana Buddhist sects that have that have really, really singled out meditative practice. They don't focus so much on bodhisattvas, they focus tons on meditation. The most famous form of this would be Zen Buddhism in Japan, really just remarkably concentrated focus on meditative practice and Zen Buddhism. And then I've already mentioned kind of the polytheistic aspect with some bodhisattvas kind of being conceived of as deities. And there are also some devotional sects of Mahayana Buddhism where basically, regardless of anything related to Dharma, Karma, or anything else, the adherents of a devotional sect of Mahayana Buddhism simply devote themselves to a bodhisattva. Kind of like bhakti yoga in Hinduism. Remember when we saw that when we read the Bhagavad Gita? But these people will devote themselves entirely to just one bodhisattva. And basically the idea, it starts to almost sound kind of Christian actually. Christian missionaries have had a lot of interesting interaction with these Buddhist groups because they have a big belief in grace and they have a big belief in intercession, and they believe that the bodhisattva will intercede for them, and when they'll die, they'll get to go to kind of a heavenly realm. And it's not so much about nirvana anymore, it's more like going to this heavenly realm, and it starts to seem very devotional, theistic, etc. And so the great variety, basically, in Mahayana Buddhism. Now, on the other side of the street, the conservative, traditionalist side of the street, you have Theravada Buddhism. And this means, like I've just brought up here, the way of the elders. It's strictly monastic, very monk-focused. You can be a Theravadan Buddhist if you're a layperson, but you'll have much the same role as you did in the original Sangha. There's a bunch of rules and teachings and things that simply don't apply to you and have no bearing on your life, and your main job is to support the real deal, the monks. This is a traditional sect. It's pretty small worldwide. It's focused in Southeast Asia, places like Thailand, Sri Lanka has a strong Theravadan presence, but Mahayana Buddhism is all over China, all over Japan, all over Korea. Really has kind of taken that part of Asia by storm, very, very much. And there's a major focus in Theravada Buddhism on austerity, simplicity, and they tend to not be super missionary minded, all of which makes sense. Okay. So, all right, that was a very quick run through a lot of stuff with Buddhism in these two parts here. A couple of takeaways for you. There tends to be, as far as their conception of God, it tends to either be impersonal or atheistic, especially for Theravadan Buddhism. There's really no mention of any divine figures, because why? You don't need them. It's all about your ignorance that you dispel, and if you can dispel your ignorance, then you'll be fine. But on the Mahayana side of things, you might have a raging pantheon of bodhisattvas, and it might be polytheistic, kind of in the way it thinks about God. They have a very diverse forms of belief and diverse practices and all that sort of thing. You must always keep that in mind. Never make the mistake of thinking you've got all types of Buddhism pinned down. Salvation is self-attained. That's just a very, very important thing to keep in mind. It's not even really salvation. I've included the word salvation, but I should have used our more neutral term. The solution to the human problem, or the solution to the human condition, is self-attained in Buddhism. You do it yourself, except for those few devotional forms of Mahayana Buddhism. But from the very start, there's been a very, very big focus on it's you, it's you, it's you, it's you. You deal with it. There's no God who swoops down and saves you from anything. It tends to lose the complicated Hindu metaphysics of karma and dharma, caste duty, those things. However, I should say that when you get into the more deep levels of Buddhist philosophy, there are equally complicated metaphysics. But basically the point here is that some Hindu categories no longer apply. And of course it rejects the Vedas and the caste system. That's why it's Buddhism and not just another school of Hinduism. So, all right, thanks for watching. Make sure you've got notes on all this stuff because it will figure into your next exam. And I'll see you all our next class meeting.